In my life, I've been lucky enough to meet many different sorts of men and, with different political beliefs, with different values, with different appearances and means and all of that. And I find, though, that when it comes to those who are successful with women and those who are not, they're ostensibly, their situations are very surprising in that men who do well with women are not necessarily wealthy, they're not necessarily attractive, they're not necessarily in any way apparently superior to the men who don't do quite so well with women. I mean, it helps if they are a little more attractive, but for the most part, I have seen very unattractive men do well with women. The difference that I find between these two groups is how they respond to rejection, in fact. In that this group I've observed tend to be more resilient. They might be a little upset or angry or in the moment or at the specific woman who has turned them down, but either they are tenacious enough not to give up on her and to continue to pursue her regardless of her rejection of him, or they are tenacious enough to continue to pursue other women in her stead once they have been rebuffed. The men who don't do so well, and I feel sad for this group, they are the ones who, upon being rejected, become bitter, or they give up, or they simply decide that they can never be loved. And, they give up on the notion so wholly that they simply stop seeking after women at all. And I really want to restate, I've seen attractive and unattractive men in both groups. I've noticed both groups, looks are irrespective, wealth is irrespective, even education is irrespective, status, all of this is irrespective. It absolutely has to do with men who don't give up tend to, sooner or later, find the woman that they will settle down with. Men who give up don't. Or it takes them much longer, and it's much more difficult. And, this might seem like a very ancillary difference. However, I have noticed little factors that impact, that are comorbid with these different responses. I've noticed that the men who are in this group tend to typically be socially better connected. Not always. Sometimes, they're equally socially connected to the people in this group, but, I'm trying to think of how to say this. They do have this willingness to persist with the friendships in their life, for the most part. They may be very rejecting of women who have rejected them, but other than that, they do tend to have fairly broad social circles, and multiple social circles. They tend to be just better connected overall. Another thing that makes these men different is that typically they are more politically liberal. Not always, but they typically have to be at least open-minded enough that if they meet a woman and she isn't exactly what they're expecting, they're still able to appreciate her and to maintain that relationship. I've noticed that men who are in this group tend to form very specific, rigid ideas about what sort of woman they'd like to be with, and they're unwavering in these standards. They're completely unwilling to bend, to the point where they will sometimes exclude perfectly good women, purely in the name of these ideals, purely in the ideal of, well, but what if a woman who's prettier or with bigger boobs or, some other feature that I like better comes along, and then I'm stuck with this woman, and they don't settle down as easily. They struggle to commit themselves to the women that they do meet. They struggle to pursue the women that they do meet with any kind of determination. And, even if they succeed in finding a woman who can like them, they really struggle to invest themselves in those relationships. And, it's not uncommon in my experience that men in this group tend to just have extremely negative perspectives on women in the first place. Not necessarily unilaterally negative, but they may insist upon very traditional gender roles of you must be, you know, a housewife, you must be a childbearer, you mustn't have a career, you mustn't have your own thoughts, you know. I mean, I have seen men who are ultra traditionalist like this on this side as well, but I've noticed a lot of the men on this side are much more aggressively this way. You know, they won't just hold it as an ideal within themselves. They'll impose it and inflict it upon the women in their life. And they won't, you know, again, they don't allow room for the woman to simply be who she is. They insist upon her matching a pre-existing standard. And, you know, again, a difference I've spotted is that men on this side tend to be very paranoid and suspicious, in my experience. They tend to, you know, they tend to struggle to believe anything they're told. And for them to believe it, it has to in some way agree with something they already believe. Whereas men on this side, I've noticed they seem to be a little more flexible. In conversations, they're less adversarial. They're more, you know, they're more receptive to what people have to say. You know, they're less inclined to try to just impose their own perspective onto the situation. And again, that's not unilateral. I have seen men who do that on this side. Somehow, I look at them and I think, how the hell did you find a wife? But somehow they managed. And, you know, I suppose the lesson that can be learned from those little exceptions is whoever you are, you can still find somebody. You know, there is no such thing as zero chance. Especially if you are willing to keep trying like these guys on this side. But, you know, yeah, I can understand that it is hard to find that kind of tenacity and motivation. It is hard to, you know, invest yourself into someone if you really just don't really like them that much. The trouble is, if you aren't willing to get out there and meet a lot of different people, you never will meet someone that you could be with. Now, yeah, actually, just as I'm telling this, I do remember a day when I was hanging out with some male friends of mine, and some of them were incel, you know, black pill kind of guys, and some of them were, not that way. Some of them were, you know, well, okay, one of them was much more open-minded and much better with women. And, yeah, it was this funny thing where he did actually flirt with me just a little bit on that day, and I did actually think he was rather cute, and had he been a Christian, I would have probably approached him. But he wasn't, and so, you know, I decided to relegate him to the realms of friendship. Not in any offensive sort of way, but just, you know, I needed that distance. But on the same day, he managed to form a relationship with another woman, and, you know, so this one guy who was, you know, willing to express himself to different women managed to find a relationship and get involved with 2 different women in one day, whilst all of these other men who were so, you know, frustrated as far as sex and dating were concerned, and were in a place, you know, filled with all sorts of people, including all kinds of women they could have been speaking to, you know, none of them succeeded in moving forward with me. I think one of them was trying to, but even then, he wasn't my type either. He wasn't a Christian either, and frankly, he's not a bad person. He's just not my type, you know? But anyway, yeah, so in summation, you know, the guys who tend to do well with women tend to be the ones who keep trying. They're not necessarily the smartest, they're not necessarily the best looking, the richest, or, you know, they don't necessarily hold a massive amount of material possessions. But what makes them different is that they are willing to keep on trying. They don't give up. They don't decide that just because one woman didn't like them that no woman ever will, because that isn't true. You know, it isn't true that just because a few women don't like you, that none of them ever will. You know, you're taking a very limited pool of data and imposing it on the very broad experience of life, and I'm going to tell you that holding that attitude is what's going to keep you from being one of those people and going to turn you into, ironically, one of these people. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you've decided your plight is hopeless, you will not continue to try with women. You will give up prematurely, and you will pass up on opportunities. You know, I can think of other men in my life who, if they hadn't have been so quick to give up, could have had relationships with me. Or, you know, well, there's broader things that can go wrong in a relationship, but between two people, but, yeah, even the guy I'm with right now, the boyfriend I have, he's, yeah, he didn't give up. He kept trying, he keeps on trying, and that is integral to why the relationship continues to survive. You know, if either of us just decided, okay, whatever, I'm gonna go now, like, of course it'd be over, but because both of us put in the effort of trying to be there for each other, it keeps going. Because he was willing to put up with 2 years of rejection, he and I were able to get something going. And yeah, I did actually give him a pretty tough time, because I was so emotionally wrapped up in somebody else when I first met him, and then later on I you know, got, you know, muddled up with someone else, and then, yeah, I had to, and then there was someone else too. I had to go through, like, yeah, getting over 3 different men before I was ready to be with this guy. But, you know, he and I managed to be together now because he didn't give up. And that's the moral of the story.